Even when you have people over and they all bring stuff, it's not really potluck, is it? You tell one person to bring this and another person tells you they're bringing that. There's just so much grace in sitting around a table with people you know, or maybe you don't know, or maybe you just don't know them yet, and you make sort of awkward, good-natured conversation, and there's a lot of because there's a hubbub in the room. There's such grace in the abundance of a potluck table. It's hard not to try a little bit of everything. There's nothing like a church potluck to give you a feel for why Jesus did so much of his ministry around tables. Table fellowship was essential to the ministry of Jesus. So here we are in today's story. Again, Jesus is eating. He's sitting on the beach around a campfire, and he's feeding people fresh fish, bread, and probably wine. That's probably what they had. So, wine, bread, fish, not a bad breakfast. And we overhear his challenge, and like his disciples, we're a little excited because this is the resurrected Jesus, and we're a little perplexed because this is the resurrected Jesus, and we're a little terrified because this is the resurrected Jesus. Feed my sheep. What does that even mean? One of the things that makes our church stand out, that makes us a growing church in a landscape where less than 15% of American churches are growing, is that we are a church of givers rather than takers. That's just the DNA here. It's the church culture here. It's who we are. It's who you are. Lots of people treat church like a restaurant. They go to the one that gives them the kind of food they like, and they go when they feel hungry. And you should go to a church where you feel spiritually fed. But that is just the starting point of a spiritual life. And the spiritual community doesn't just feed you when you happen to be feeling spiritually hungry. It feeds you when you don't know you're hungry. It feeds you when you don't come to church because you thought you needed to be in church, and you find that you needed to be in church precisely because someone else near you needed you to be there. And that's when the abundant life Jesus talks about, the life of joy and satisfaction and serenity and peace, a life where fear tends to drop away, is when we begin to feel the shift from only being a taker to being more of a giver. And that's who we are here. That's who you are. You've been that way for 100 years. And if you grew up in this church, it taught you to be that way. And if you grew up in some other church and came here, you found that and wanted to be a part of that. And we shape each other by this church culture of being willing to give. I don't mean being a bunch of doormats. I mean looking for ways to be Christians who give instead of just take. And we have engaged with the Changemaker Church Initiative to help us lay claim to that and put some shape around it and give it a name. And as I introduced her before, Karen Kehlet is the Director of Learning for the Changemaker Initiative. And I've asked her to share with me this morning, and to begin by sharing a little bit of what some of you have heard before, but those of you who weren't here in 2021 and haven't been here all that time, a little for you to learn, but also to introduce you to a story that is used in our Changemaker Fellowship to help us understand how each one of us finds our way to be a giver instead of a taker. Would you welcome Karen?
Thank you. It's good to be here with you all today. You're entering the third year of your partnership with the Changemaker Initiative. And during this time, members of your congregation have engaged in two of our programs, the Changemaker Fellowship, which is for individuals, and the Congregational Team Program that you're currently involved in, where a group of members of your congregation together participate in our Becoming a Risk-Taking Church curriculum. Both of our programs are grounded in the exploration of Jesus as the ultimate compassion-driven change maker. And we provide resources and activities to help participants discern what it means for them individually and as a congregation to follow Jesus in this way. One resource we often turn to is a story, or an article, I guess I'd say, by Father Richard Rohr called Spirituality and Social Movements. And in this article, Father Richard postulates that there are 3 different types of ministries. There are service ministries, education and healing ministries, and then systems change type of ministries. And he explains them using a metaphor that many of you have probably heard used in a variety of contexts about the different ways of responding when people are drowning in a river. Okay, so a service-oriented person comes upon people drowning in a river, and they immediately jump in and pull the people out. They offer immediate relief and save them from drowning. Someone in the educational path or healing path might try to teach them to swim, providing a service that is a little bit more lasting, okay? And then finally, somebody who is more into systems change will look up the river. They want to try to figure out what the root of the problem is. Why are the people falling in the river in the first place? And what needs to be changed to prevent that? So in the metaphor, you go upstream and you find out that the bridge is broken. So the team of systems changers gather together and begin rebuilding the bridge. Now, Father Richard doesn't say that one path is better than any other. Quite the contrary, he says they're all needed, and as individuals and community, we need to participate in whatever way we are called to do. You don't have to take Father Richard's word for it. Jesus does the same thing. Jesus participates in service ministry when he feeds the hungry. He educates through sermons and parables. And as a disruptor of the status quo, Jesus turns over the tables and restores outcasts to community repeatedly. Okay? As change makers in the way of Jesus, we are called to discern which of the 3 paths is the right one for us so that we can live a more active faith. Change makers are also nudged to take a risk, to try something new, and maybe explore one of those paths that are a little bit less comfortable for us initially. It's kind of like being told to fish on the other side of the boat.
One member of our first-year Changemaker cohort discovered that they were very much a servant or a volunteer person, kind of that first path. You can even think of it as a level because this is the most frontline, on the ground level. Their place, this is someone who wants to be right on the front lines. Their greatest concern is people who are hungry or unclothed or somehow not getting some of their basic needs met. And they feel very fulfilled and called when they're active doing this. They even got involved in an organization beyond our church that does this same thing. And I've asked Karen to elaborate a little on that level 1, that path, that way of ministry that's right there on the front line.
Yeah, for many people, service is their sweet spot. This is an important and necessary part of stepping into God's dream for flourishing for us all. These are ways of service that you're used to hearing about all the time, where you provide food and clothing to the needy, or maybe temporary housing to people during the winter months. Another fellow of ours from Pennsylvania, Margot, decided that this was her calling, and she started gathering necessities like diapers and toiletries for needy members of her community and found a way to distribute them through her church. churches are really good at service-type ministry. We're strong in it. We've been doing it for years, and I'm sure you all have participated in some way or another in this type of work.
If you're a servant volunteer kind of person, there are some risks that you take as you find your way in this path. You may decide you're willing to put yourself in a situation that is not entirely comfortable for you, not necessarily dangerous, but less comfortable. You may also decide that you're going to adjust your schedule of recreational activities so you can be more engaged with helping others. And this is also a place where straight up financial charity really matters. Giving money to good people who do good things is part of being on the front line of helping people. Now, that other next path that Karen described is a little broader in scope. When Jesus says, "Feed my sheep" to Peter, he of course means feed hungry people, take care of people. But we also know this is a spiritual truth. He's using this as a metaphor, and that spiritual hunger and physical hunger are equally important to people. As the song says, people need bread and they need roses. And feed my sheep, when Jesus says it to Peter, is often interpreted by Bible scholars to suggest that Peter is supposed to be taking care of the disciples so that the disciples can take care of other people. That there's a place here where someone equips, someone helps guide, someone does some research. So I'm going to ask Karen to elaborate for you on this second path, this level 2.
Following Jesus' ministry of education and healing, our faith tradition has historically played a key role in the establishment of universities and building of hospitals. But you don't have to build a college or be a doctor to engage in this type of ministry. Many of our Changemaker Fellows have taken the path of education and healing as their Changemaker projects. And by this, they are teaching people how to swim by sharing their own experiences and knowledge and reaching out to the community with compassion in this way. For example, your own Patrick has created the Barrette Brigade, which provides support and resources to single fathers. Another fellow, Christy from Santa Rosa, uses her computer skills to teach computer safety and privacy and virus protection to members of the community that don't have that knowledge. These types of services where you're not just providing immediate relief, but passing on some information or creating some kind of a community brings healing and is kind of that second path of ministry.
We have someone in our church who doesn't even know he's a change maker. John Jaker isn't just a choir member or a bell director. He spends part of his year down at our senior center helping people learn how to file their taxes. He doesn't just do their taxes for them, he helps them learn what they need to know to be able to do a good job getting their taxes handled and on time. Now, the third path is the one I think that intimidates most people. Karen calls it systems change. And most of us have this idea that we have to be a lawmaker or we have to be a social activist in order to do that, and we really don't. It is certainly the most broad in scope. But as Karen illustrated just a moment ago, it's essential. If you don't mend the bridge, people are going to keep drowning. And it sounds most of the time like the hardest, riskiest path. This is the path of people like Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr. But it's also the path of one of our members who did something that's not at all intimidating if you're the right person. She moved into a neighborhood and realized that the neighborhood was a bunch of people who happened to live on the same street and otherwise didn't seem to have anything in common. And so she began having monthly neighborhood dinners. And she did it for years. for years. It was very intentional. And it wasn't just to make sure everybody got enough to eat. It wasn't just to make sure people weren't lonely, although those are admirable. She also had a vision. She understood that American associational life has thinned over the years. A lot of us live in our neighborhood, but it doesn't matter where we live. That just happens to be our address. A lot of us don't know our neighbors. People come and go so often that we don't often have the time or energy, and it can be intimidating to knock on a stranger's door and invite them into your home. But at the larger level, she was able to make a dent in her calling, her passion for making our neighborhoods, our associational life together, stronger. Karen's going to elaborate a little more on this third level.
Yeah, I think people get frightened by this one because they don't want to carry around that social activist label. It's a little intimidating. And certainly those people out there who are organizing protests and using the political system to bring about social change fall into this category, and that's important work. And we're all glad that they do it, and maybe some of you actually are engaged in that work, and I'm talking about you right now. But there is a way to chip away at systems, broken systems, to heal them. That doesn't involve organizing a protest, for example, as she was talking about with the example of one of your fellows. Pam is a fellow from Palm Springs, and she very much is concerned about the environment. And she ended up organizing a community composting site on a corner of her church property. Now, she's not ending global warming single-handedly, but what she is doing is modeling for other people what it means to take a step toward making that kind of a difference. And she's invited other people in the congregation and the community to join her in this mission. Myrna is another fellow from Los Angeles, and she focused her project on getting her community more involved in elections because they didn't understand how their individual votes actually mattered. Do you know any more people that are falling into this category?
I do. I have a friend, Doug, who spent a decade in New York City living the life of a financier, and then he moved to California and eventually found himself working in the nonprofit sector. And it turns out, for a lot of reasons, that he has a real passion for health equity. Not health equality, everybody gets the same thing, everybody has equal access to health, but everybody gets what they need, health equity. He would really want me to stress that. Feed my sheep, indeed. When he was a finance guy in New York, he worked for a company in the 80s and 90s. Small town banks, and some of you will remember this, started disappearing. They would go under because those were the years when interest rates were extraordinarily high, and small banking institutions, particularly neighborhood savings and loans, simply couldn't stay viable with their asset-to-debt ratio. So his company began buying them up. Now that sounds like a terrible thing, and I don't know what happened later in its history, because it could look just like another conglomerate, another mega organization where everything is faceless, and we know what it feels like to be the customer of one of those places. But what this company did instead was provide the kind of infrastructure support that allowed these banks to keep all of their people in place. The person who had previously been the president of the bank became the regional vice president, and all of the people who were known in the town, who had relationships, were able to continue to have a local feeling bank, but that bank needed what a larger organization could do. Well, Doug now uses those same skills working for neighborhood clinics. He works for a large organization that pulls together a consortium of neighborhood clinics, and they serve millions of people in San Diego County. And these are neighborhood clinics. They're clinics where people with insurance can go. There are clinics where people with no insurance can go. There are clinics where poor people can go. There's some sliding scale stuff, and you can go there if you don't have any money. Here's why that's important. You well know, I'm sure you're all acquainted with the fact that emergency rooms are overrun by people who are sick and do not have insurance and do not have money, because the law requires emergency rooms to serve anybody who shows up. This is why 2 Tylenol at the hospital costs $47, because the hospital has to pay its people somehow. Well, in this consortium, they are able to put together teams at the higher level who can write grants, who can get grants from foundations, get grants from the federal government, fulfill all the requirements of that grant, and fund all of these clinics so that the clinic is not doing anything for free, but the people who need stuff get what they need for free. He's making a big dent in health inequity in his county. And he did this by starting with a small professional risk when he moved out of the big money, and now he just gets good money. Christianity is a risk-taking faith. We risk something good for something big. We gave away these bracelets a year and a half or 2 years ago, and if you would like one, there's a few of them left. And I'm telling you this because I don't believe this is just aspirational. I'm not asking you if you want to. I'm telling you I see this here. This is what I see. This is who we actually are. And as much as you might get a little squirmy or uncomfortable about me telling you you're a risk-taking church or you're a bunch of change makers in the way of a compassion-driven person like Jesus, I think you actually like it because I do, and it's who you are. Karen's going to share with us just a little bit about what it means not just to be a risk-taking change maker, but to be a part of a change-making church and what that means.
So currently you have a team of your members who are participating in the Becoming a Risk-Taking Church curriculum. And I'm going to tell you about a congregation that's already been through the process, and they finished it about 3 months ago. So we don't know exactly where your team is going to end up and what's going to come out of this work. But I can just give you a little preview based on this other experience. Without telling you all about the curriculum, there's a piece of it, a very essential piece, that involves deep listening and really hearing what the members of the congregation as well as the community are saying about their lives. And this congregation in Stockton did this deep listening part and took it very seriously. And while they thought they knew the work that their congregation was called to do, when they engaged in this listening, they found out that they were very wrong and that there was a pervasive loneliness among the senior population in their community. And they had to take a risk and put aside that project that they thought they were going to pursue and take a look at this senior loneliness issue and try to decide what's one little experiment, what's something we can try to chip away at that loneliness. So they started a program that they call Lunch on Us. And their first experiment was, I think in December, they served a lunch free for any seniors in their congregation or in the community. They saw it as one of those education healing, like that second path we've been talking about, where they would be providing community for these people and try to help heal some of this loneliness. What they discovered is they unintentionally stumbled into the other two paths at the same time. The more they got to know these seniors, and they are still coming, so it's been months now, some of those seniors were actually food insecure, and they had no idea about that because these seniors had homes and they just thought otherwise everything was fine. But they slowly started sharing that they had a problem with food security, and they were starting to take leftovers home from these lunches so they could have a couple extra meals during that week. So it became a mission of service. But then the more surprising thing they just discovered very recently, the way they do these lunches is they partner with restaurants very near the church itself, and they just feature a restaurant every month. and that restaurant they pay the restaurant to provide the food. And so there's business cards and advertising and all of that. And in talking to the restaurant owners, they've discovered that the mission of Lunch on Us is actually helping restore those community businesses that were so demolished by the pandemic, because it's starting to, people are trying their food and then coming on their own to those restaurants. So they ended up in all three paths without even realizing it. And this congregation is now revitalized by this ministry, and they are continuing to do these lunches and are starting to think of really creative ways to continue funding it, because they don't want it to go away. But it started out as a little tiny experiment just to see what would happen.
It's such a joy to have Karen with us, and if you want to talk to her more about the Changemaker, I hope some of you will sit at her table at the potluck and learn more, especially if you're interested in being a part of one of the cohorts